Hi there, if you're in the market for a new Kindle right now, there's a good chance you may be debating between the Kindle Paperwhite and the Kindle Oasis over here. Now for the longest time, I was a Kindle Oasis user and I would always recommend the Oasis over the Paperwhite if you had the money and you were a serious reader. However, in today's world with the new Kindle Paperwhite that just came out last week, I have to say my mind has been changed and I'm officially converted to the Kindle Paperwhite. In today's video, I want to tell you exactly why the new Kindle Paperwhite has become my go-to Kindle. Now we're going to start by talking about the buying experience for both devices. After that, I'll be talking about the specs and features, all the differences and similarities between the Oasis and the Paperwhite. And then lastly, I'll be sharing my thoughts as a Kindle Oasis user for the past year, what I think about both these devices. Let's jump into it. Now let's start by talking about the buying experience for both the Paperwhite and the Oasis. Now for the Oasis, the whole thing about the Oasis is about flexibility. You can really choose exactly how you want to configure this device when you buy it. What I mean by that is there's just so many options to choose from. You can really customize this to your liking. For example, the first thing you can choose is the color of the device. They have a gold option and a gray option, which is really nice if you like customizing the color. On top of that, you can choose your storage capacity, 8 or 32 gigabytes. Now that does cost extra money, but no matter which one you get, you can choose that storage capacity, which is really, really nice. Personally speaking, I don't think it's worth upgrading your storage capacity. I have a whole video talking about this, link for that on the screen right now. But besides storage capacity, another option you have is ads or no ads, which is also a standard Kindle thing. I don't like that they have this as an option even. I wish it was no ads for everyone, but in the US, you have to choose if you want ads or not on your screensaver. And lastly, we also have this cellular option for an extra $100. You have the ability to not use your Wi-Fi with your Kindle Oasis. You can travel around and just connect to the internet with the built-in antenna, which is very handy if you travel a lot. But all of that does add up in cost. This thing could cost upwards of $350 if you get all the options and whatnot. So it's a very pricey device, but with that, you do have some flexibility of configuring it exactly the way you like it. Now, one thing I should say about the Kindle Oasis is several of the configuration options are sold out. For example, that cellular option I talked about has been back ordered for as long as I can remember now. I'm not too sure what the deal is. Maybe it's a chip shortage happening right now, but a lot of these options, including the color options even, some of these configurations aren't available. So even though it looks like you have flexibility, you really don't. It all depends on their inventory. Now, next up, we have the Kindle Paperwhite over here. In terms of the buying experience, it is very different than the Kindle Oasis. You only get two different options. You have the baseline Kindle Paperwhite starting at $139, or you have the Kindle Paperwhite Signature Edition for $50 more. Now, when it comes to the baseline Kindle Paperwhite, the only option you really have is ads versus no ads on your screensaver. For $20 extra, you could remove the ads. Everything else is set for you. You can't change your storage capacity, you can't change your color, and it's Wi-Fi only. It's a very, very locked down device in terms of your flexibility for configuring it the way you want it. Now, the Signature Edition does cost $50 more, but with that, you get no ads on your device. You also get an ambient light sensor as well as wireless charging. All of these things are very, very interesting because the Oasis, no matter which model you get, the hardware features are all the same. But with the Paperwhite, when you get the Signature Edition, you're actually getting a better device, which is really, really interesting. So in terms of the buying experience over here, it really depends on your personality. The Oasis is much more flexible. The Paperwhite is much more simple. I actually prefer the Paperwhite. It is so much easier to understand what you're getting between the Signature model and the baseline model. With the Oasis, every single one that's sold is probably slightly different. There's just so many options to choose from. And right now, there's just so many shortages where you really can't even get the one that you want. Okay, moving on, I want to talk about the similarities and differences in terms of the features and specs of these devices. Starting with build quality. The Kindle Paperwhite is definitely not as high quality as the Kindle Oasis. The back of the Kindle Paperwhite is this black, rubbery, plasticky material. It gets fingerprints very, very easily and it gets smudged up. It's really hard to clean the back of the Kindle Paperwhite. With that being said though, the front of the Kindle Paperwhite is a nice flush glass display, and I really like that. That does feel really nice, high quality. Now, when it comes to the Kindle Oasis, the reason why the price is probably so much higher than the Paperwhite is because you're paying for a much better build quality. The Oasis is made of metal, and I really love this because it really makes it feel like a premium device. The entire back of the device is a metal aluminum finish, and I really like that. When you hold it, it just feels so nice and high quality. The front of the device is also a flush glass display. This device does get fingerprints, but the back of the device does not really show them as much. The front does, just like the Kindle Paperwhite, but you can wipe them off with a microfiber cloth very, very easily. Now, one extra thing the Oasis does have are these page turn buttons on the right side of the device. This is because the Oasis is designed in an ergonomic way. If you see the back of the device over here, you can clearly see this hump on the right side, and that is there for your hand to easily hold on to the device. And I really do appreciate this. I can really hold this device with one hand and have no issues whatsoever. I also like using the page turn buttons, but personally speaking, I don't think these buttons are worth it on their own. I have a whole video talking about that too. Link for that on the screen right now. Now, here are my thoughts on the build quality for both devices over here. I do prefer the premium feeling of the Oasis, but one thing you'll notice here, I'm actually holding it right now with a case on it. And that is because the Oasis without a case is very, very slippery. I had to buy a case very quickly after buying my Oasis. And once you put a case on this device, it really takes away the premium feeling of the device. You no longer feel like you're holding a premium device. It just feels like any other Kindle. Now, on the flip side, with the Kindle Paperwhite over here, I also have a case on it, but for a different reason. That is because the back of the device gets smudged up too much. It gets really dirty very quickly. So I got a case to cover that up. And now both devices feel exactly the same in my hand. I really can't tell the difference in terms of the build quality. The only real difference I see at this point with the build are those page turn buttons and that ergonomic design on the Kindle Oasis. It is really nice to have, but personally speaking, it's not enough to justify buying the Kindle Oasis for that high price tag. The Kindle Paperwhite still feels really nice to hold, and making the case on it really helps a lot with holding it in an ergonomic way. Now let me talk about holding both devices over here. Both devices have very small bezels, but the Kindle Paperwhite has a very small bezel on all sides except the bottom. So I think they're really intending for people to hold it from the bottom of the device, but when you're holding a book naturally, you tend to hold it from the right side so you can hold it with one hand, and it's much easier to hold with a case on it. Without this case on it, I found myself holding the Kindle Paperwhite from the bottom quite often. Now on the Kindle Oasis, it's very different. Holding the device is much easier because they have that ergonomic design. You can hold it from the right side very, very easily. You can even flip the orientation. There's a sensor inside the device. It'll flip the whole book for you, so you can easily hold it left or right. So again, the really advantage you're getting here with the Oasis is the ability to hold this device in a much easier way. But the Kindle Paperwhite with the case on it, it just becomes so much easier to hold. It's not as nice as the Oasis, but the Paperwhite still does a very good job. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about are the ports and power features of both devices. The Kindle Oasis has an advertised 6 weeks of battery life. I don't think I've ever gotten a full 6 weeks. That's a month and a half of battery. It's a very long time. I think the most I've gotten on this device is a few weeks, maybe a month of charge. The Oasis also has a micro USB charging port, which is kind of annoying. It was the only device I had for the longest time that required a micro USB charger. Again, I would only charge this thing every week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending how much I would read. So it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. I just kept that micro USB charger laying around nearby so I can plug it in and charge it when the time came. Now the Kindle Paperwhite, on the other hand, is very different. They advertise 10 weeks of battery life, almost double the 6 weeks of the Kindle Oasis. I don't think I'll actually be getting 10 weeks though. They advertise this by using it for a half hour every single day at medium brightness. That's what this has on the product page. I don't know though how accurate that is. I've only had this device for a week now. I don't think it's gonna last me 10 weeks. I do think it'll last longer than my Oasis though. So that's very, very exciting. Having more battery life is always a good thing. The added benefit of the Paperwhite though is it actually has USB-C, so I don't have to carry around an extra cable anymore. I can charge this Kindle Paperwhite with the same cable I use for my iPad, for my laptop. They all use USB-C, so it is so much easier and more convenient now to charge my Kindle. And on top of that, if you have the signature model, you can wirelessly charge your Kindle. Not the biggest deal in the world. Again, you don't really charge Kindles very often, so the charging port is not the biggest annoyance in the world. It's just a nice to have. Next up over here, we have the display on both devices. The Kindle Paperwhite is rocking a 6.8-inch display, and the Kindle Oasis has a 7-inch display. Both devices have 300 ppi resolution, which is really nice, and they both also have warm light temperature control. Now the Kindle Oasis by default will have the ambient light sensor to automatically adjust the brightness for you, whereas on the Paperwhite, you have to get the signature model to have that sensor. But putting that aside, the display on both these devices are pretty much exactly the same. The Kindle Oasis is a bit bigger of a screen at 7 inches compared to 6.8, but I don't see much of a difference there. It only holds a few extra words on the page. In reality, they are both pretty much exactly the same. The Kindle Paperwhite actually, I'm pretty sure, has a newer e-ink display, so I think it looks a bit nicer than the Oasis, but at the end of the day, again, they're pretty much exactly the same. This used to be the biggest difference between the devices. The Oasis was the only one with the warm light temperature control. That was the biggest selling point of the Oasis. However, now with the new Paperwhite, that has become a standard feature, so I really can't say now the Oasis is a better screen. I don't think it does. I really think the Paperwhite and the Oasis are on an even playing field when it comes to the screen. Now, the one thing that's not an even playing field is the speed of both devices over here. The Kindle Oasis used to be the fastest Kindle you can buy. It has a dual core 1 GHz processor. It was noticeably faster than the old Kindle Paperwhite. It was very snappy. Changing pages were really quick. Opening menus and settings compared to the old Paperwhite was a night and day difference. However, the new Kindle Paperwhite has gotten a major upgrade, and I have to say it's actually quicker now than the Kindle Oasis. We don't know exactly what the hardware processor is inside the Kindle Paperwhite, but I think because of the new screen they're using on the Kindle Paperwhite, they were able to make it so much faster. The Oasis and the Paperwhite are pretty much the same speed now at almost all tasks, but for some things like changing pages and opening up menus, the Paperwhite actually beats the Oasis. I'm really surprised about this, especially with the new page turn animation feature that is exclusive to the new Kindle Paperwhite. You can clearly see it just feels so much more quicker on the Paperwhite compared to the Oasis. Let me do a bit of a recap now, explaining why you might want to consider buying each device. When it comes to the Kindle Oasis, you're paying a premium. This device costs at sometimes over $100 more than the Kindle Paperwhite, depending on your configuration. Now, the Oasis does have a few good things going for it. First being the screen size of the device. It's a 7-inch screen versus 6.8 inches on the Kindle Paperwhite. Now, that really doesn't make much of a difference. Both devices have basically the same amount of text on the page when you put them side to side. Next up, the Oasis also has a much better build quality with the metal backing, much more premium feeling. You're paying for that build quality, which is really nice. However, the second you put a case on this device, you completely miss out on feeling that build quality, which kind of sucks. Now, the one thing the Kindle Oasis does have though are those page turn buttons, and I have to say, once you have page turn buttons, it's kind of hard to go back to a device without them, but it really isn't the deal breaker for me. I've been able to use my Paperwhite without missing these page turn buttons too much, but it is really nice to have, very convenient to have on the Oasis. I have a whole video talking about that, so that's one extra feature you're getting on the Oasis. Now, one more thing you're also getting on the Oasis is actually a brighter screen. Technically speaking, this device has 25 LEDs versus the Paperwhite that has 17 LEDs. I put that side to side and I barely see any difference, so I really can't say that's an advantage of the Oasis, but on paper, it does have more LEDs on the screen, which may be something you want to consider. And then lastly, the Oasis has much more flexibility for configuration. You can really customize this device exactly the way you like it. But as of right now, when making this video, a lot of those options are sold out. So I really, again, can't say how much of an advantage this point is compared to the Paperwhite. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Paperwhite is a much cheaper device compared to the Oasis, but you're actually getting more functionality in certain places. The first being you're getting a faster device. It just feels so much snappier than the Kindle Oasis. And on top of that, you're also getting USB-C charging, which is something the Kindle Oasis does not have yet. You also have the option of wireless charging, which is still cheaper than the Kindle Oasis, which is really, really interesting to see. And then lastly, we're also seeing some new benefits come down the road over here. This new page turn animation update is only available for the new Kindle Paperwhite. This may be a sign that there's some new updates coming in the future that will only work on the Kindle Paperwhite. This may be the beginning of the end for the Kindle Oasis in terms of the support Amazon will be giving it. We'll have to see where things go. At this point in time, I really find myself using the Kindle Paperwhite over my Kindle Oasis, which is a really big deal for me. I'm using this device for over a year and I'm finally replacing it with a new Kindle. Leave a comment down below. Which device will you be using, Kindle Paperwhite or Kindle Oasis? Also, if you haven't already, check out my full review of the Kindle Paperwhite. Link for that on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.